Good evening, welcome to Left, Right and Centre. I'm Vishnu Shom. On the programme tonight, the big development, the case of the horror video from Manipur, which showed two women being paraded naked by a mob, will be investigated by the Central Bureau of Investigation, the CBI. The Home Ministry has referred the case to the CBI days after it evoked nationwide outrage and sparked a huge political face-off with the united opposition. Sources say that the government also wants to run the trial outside Manipur, which has been witnessing violence for the last 3 months. Next up on the show, 98 students died by suicide in the past 5 years in higher education institutions, including central universities, IITs, IIMs, NITs and IISERs, according to the Ministry of Education in a statement to Parliament. Nearly 50% of students who die by suicides in these higher institutions are SC, ST and OBC students. And in terms of dropouts, and this is shocking, a whopping 8,000 SC, ST students dropped out of IITs, IIMs and NIITs in the last 5 years. Why is this happening? Are these institutes of inclusion or exclusion? And finally, at 9:30 p.m, we break details of a brand new report which looks at temperatures around the globe this July. Is this the hottest July recorded in human history? Just how catastrophic is this? Are the floods that we see in North India linked to this? Climate change is real. It's time to get serious. The author of the report from the University of Leipzig in Germany will be joining us. But first, the big development, the case of the horror video from Manipur, which showed two women being paraded naked by a mob. That will be investigated by the Central Bureau of Investigation. My colleagues Megha Prasad and Neeta Sharma join us for the very latest details. Megha, what does the centre now intend to do?
Well, the centre has taken a few important decisions, Vishnu, in the context of that video that went viral about two tribal women being paraded naked in Manipur. The first decision, of course, like you said, is to refer that case to the CBI. So there are 6 cases already from Manipur that the government has, referred to the CBI. This is going to be the 7th one. That's decision number 1. The decision number 2 is that the government is going to file an affidavit in the Supreme Court saying that the trial of this case needs to be run outside the state of Manipur. So it would be, referred to perhaps a court outside the state. So that's another thing that they're very clear about. The third very, very important thing, Vishnu, is this, that the government has already started fencing the border with Manipur. Now, just the identification of the border is going to take a long time, perhaps maybe 2 years or more. So at this moment, what the government is doing, the areas that seem to be very, very problematic to them, they have identified it. So 10 kilometers of that area has already been fenced, 60 more kilometers to go, because there was an earlier agreement in a treaty with Myanmar that allowed, Indians to move get into the territory of Myanmar till about 16 kilometers and vice versa into ours without any valid details or documents. So that now will have to change. Also, before I wrap up, Vishnu, is that the government is now telling us that they are extremely hopeful that a solution and perhaps a lasting solution to the problems in Manipur will be found soon, because 6 rounds of meeting with a government representative, in some of them Mr. Amit Shah himself, the Home Minister, was present. 6 rounds of meetings have happened with the Kuki side, 6 rounds of meeting has happened with the Methi side. So in all, 12 rounds of meetings have happened. The government is hopeful that soon enough they are going to have both the sides sit together across the table with the government mediating to look for a
very
solution
big news
to the
indeed.
That is
the possibility of both sides getting together. Neeta, are you hearing any more details on that?
See, already the government is reaching out to various, groups, civil societies. What we are learning, Vishnu, that as many as 17 civil society groups, government is talking to them through back channels also. Yesterday also there was an important meeting at North Block. In fact, these Sioux leaders who are, ex-militia, they met some senior officers in Ministry of Home Affairs. Although it was yesterday, there was a direct meeting. They wanted, a political solution as far as Manipur is concerned. They said they want a separate administration from Manipur. So obviously, the dialogue is the only way forward. That is what our sources also tell us. But as far as Manipur is concerned, the government says that they have been continuously reaching out to various communities, and this case being transferred to CBI can also be seen as a confidence building measure, to reassure both the communities, because there were allegations that Manipur police was not acting swiftly, even though 7 to 8 people were arrested in this case, which included a juvenile. But there were allegations because the police station is located in a place which is surrounded by another community. So the allegation of favoritism was always there.
Yes,
so but now these arrests have taken place. In fact, the government...
Absolutely. Look, I'm just wrapping this up because there's another story from Manipur which is of concern. In fact, this one from Nagaland, it concerns Manipur. 70 days after the violence began in Manipur, the Nagaland police have arrested a police inspector accused of stealing ammunition from the armory of the Nagaland police and transferring it to people in Manipur. The police are looking into how this ammunition was allegedly stolen and sold to people engaged in active gun battles.
This man, an inspector in the Nagaland police, is at the center of investigation by the police, who believe he stole and sold ammunition to people in Manipur. Police sources have told NDTV that 6 people, including the inspector, 4 civilians, including 2 from Manipur, and a local gun runner, have been arrested. They are accused of stealing thousands of rounds of ammunition to be used in IISERs automatic rifles and in self-loading rifles. The ammunition was being stolen from a central store in Chumukedima. The police inspector, identified as Michael Yangthang, was allegedly paid rupees 4.25 lakhs to acquire the ammunition.
The inspector was only acting in his personal capacity. We have not found any angle of any conspiracy or any wrongdoing by any other person. He was in charge of the store and he just stole the ammunition from there without anyone knowing it, and investigations revealed that he was actually being foolish and greedy because he had stolen the ammunition and he was planning to show it used against the next classification firing which would have taken place. This is absolute foolish act on his part. After the Dimapur police swung into action, we were all supervising the operation. We monitored it very closely. We've established the money trail.
According to highly placed sources in Nagaland police, the cops got a tip-off and an operation was launched on 9th of July. The very next day, they were able to apprehend 2 people in a vehicle which had an Assam number plate and seize 2,500 rounds of live ammunitions of automatic weapons, which were put in 3 different sacks. And then in further investigation, they were able to arrest a lady who was involved. She led them to a leader of a rebel group who further led them to a middleman, and finally they were able to arrest the main person, their very own, the inspector who was posted in the central armory and who has done the theft.
This is not the first time that this has happened. 10 years back, an NDTV investigation revealed how parts of Nagaland, particularly Dimapur, had been a hub of illegal weapon sales and supplied across the northeast. In Guwahati, Ratndeep Chaudhary for NDTV.
Well, we're going to move on now to our big focus this evening. One of 2 big focus points later on at 9:30 p.m. Do keep watching. We're breaking a special report which has come out on the weather in the month of July. It is startling from a global standpoint. It is a climate emergency. So that's what we'll be looking at very, very closely indeed. But for now, let's take a look at a report which has been submitted in Parliament on suicides in top institutes in our country. We're talking about IITs and IIMs, and also the dropout rate. It's a theme that we have followed many times in the past, but we are doing this with a particular focus on SC, ST and OBC students, because the numbers of those who have ended their lives by suicide and the number of those actually dropping out are very, very large indeed. So there have been 98 cases of death by suicide in 5 years in top centers, 39 in IITs, 25 in NIITs, 25 in central universities, 4 at the IIMs. And this is what I was talking about. Nearly 50% of students who die by suicide are from the SC, ST or OBC community. This is the Education Ministry's data submitted in Parliament. So is this in a sense a degree of discrimination? Is the other set of data that we want to look at. And what we're looking at are dropouts. In the last 5 years, 8,000 SC, ST students have dropped out of the IITs, the IIMs and the NIITs. It's important to remember that these are by far and away the most prestigious educational institutions in this country, much sought after and in many senses almost impossible to get into. Why is this actually taking place? Let's just consider a couple of points. Placement in public sector enterprises, is that a factor why people who get in are actually exiting? A personal preference for better opportunities, but that seems unlikely, doesn't it? Particularly if you work so hard to take the exams. Was there a wrong choice filled in admission? Was there poor performance in the institution? Or were there personal and medical reasons? These are the factors that we actually want to look at very closely. We're joined by Professor Rajkumar Rafalwadia, Chairperson of the Centre for Social Development, Anand Kumar, the founder of Super 30. He'll be working very closely with NDTV on a series on this channel very soon. Kannan Modgalya, Professor at IIT Bombay, Milind Kamble, President of the Dalit Indian Chamber of Commerce and Industry, and Dr. Suraj Yengde, author and columnist. Thank you all very much for being with us. Professor Modgalya, these numbers are very shocking in IIT, on the other institutions as well. How are we systemically, or are we systemically failing students from less advantaged groups?
I'm really happy to be here, Vishnu. I have been your fan for a long time and happy to be in this program. So I would say that many of these students come really exhausted after the IIT entrance exam. Even if you assume that it is not the public sector enterprises and so on, that it is because of IIT, the way it is done in IITs and other places, the entrance exam drains them out. Probably it affects the target population a lot more. That's point number one. The second point I would like to make is the grueling entrance exam that these students undergo, the preparation they make for that really doesn't help them after they get into some of these institutions. For example, somebody prepares for IIT and then gets into prepares for several years, gets into IIT and finds that those things are not really required in IIT. They have nothing to do with that. So some of these target population students belonging to target population spend a lot of time, effort, money, and they probably get affected a lot more. I would say this is possibly one main reason.
Okay, let me just bring in Anand Kumar over here. Anandji, you've trained so many students for entrance into these excellent institutions. Could you give us your reason on why this is taking place? Is there a lack of support for students from the SC, ST, OBC community?
दरअसल में क्या होता है कि हम लोग तो बच्चों को पढ़ा कर भेजते हैं, लेकिन कहीं न कहीं उनके सिलेक्शन व्यवस्था पर, जो सिलेक्शन करने का उनका तरीका, उस पर भी प्रश्न उठता है कि भाई अगर आप बच्चों को संभाल नहीं पाते हैं तो ऐसे बच्चों को क्यों चुनते हैं? बच्चे तो टैलेंटेड होते हैं, बहुत मेहनत करके आते हैं, अपने माता पिता को छोड़कर 2 साल तैयारी करके, 4 साल तैयारी करके आपके पास पहुंचते हैं, और आप बच्चे को वहां से ड्रॉप आउट होने के लिए मजबूर कर रहे हैं या सुसाइड करने के लिए। बहुत शर्मिंदगी की बात है। सबसे बड़ी वजह इसमें यह है कि बच्चे जब वहां जाते हैं तो वो इंग्लिश नहीं ठीक से बोल पाते हैं, पढ़ाई, क्योंकि वो पिछड़े समाज के बच्चे, उनके माता पिता या उनकी स्कूलिंग ऐसी नहीं होती है कि इंग्लिश मीडियम में पढ़े हो, इंग्लिश में बात कर पाए। और कुछ बच्चे ऐसे अभिजात वर्ग के होते हैं, इलीट क्लास के होते हैं, जो इंग्लिश में बात करते हैं, प्रोफेसर इंग्लिश में पढ़ाते हैं, उनके लिए कोई रीजनल लैंग्वेज में पढ़ाने की व्यवस्था नहीं होती है, उनको काउंसलिंग कोई ठीक से नहीं करता है, बच्चे कटे कटे महसूस करते हैं, टेस्ट आने वाला होता है, एग्जाम का डर होता है, और पूरा माहौल जहां की जो जनरल कैटेगरी के बच्चे को सपोर्ट करना चाहिए उस तरीके से सपोर्ट मिलता नहीं है, तो कुल मिला जुला कर उनका डिप्रेशन इतना हाई हो जाता है कि वो या तो ड्रॉप आउट हो जाते हैं या उससे भी ज्यादा सुसाइड कर लेते हैं।
Milind Kamble, Anand raised 2 points. He spoke about depression and he spoke about pressure. He also spoke about a lack of support. What are some of the factors in your minds?
यस, बिल्कुल मैं सहमत हूं आनंद कुमार जी ने जो कहा, क्योंकि अभी अगर आप देखोगे तो आईआईटी और एनआईटी में जो एडमिशन होता है वो 12th के बाद होता है, और 12th तक और उसके पहले वाला जो एजुकेशन बच्चों का जो होता है वह उनके लैंग्वेज में होता है, और यहाँ पे आने के बाद दो टेक्निकल इंस्टीट्यूट टेक्निकल इंग्लिश होती है, फिर भी बच्चे वो जो एकेडमिक स्ट्रेस जो होता है वो झेल नहीं पाते, यह सच है। मगर यूजीसी का कुछ गाइडलाइंस है, यूजीसी के गाइडलाइंस के मुताबिक इंस्टीट्यूट में मैकेनिज्म खड़ा करना चाहिए, तो ऐसे बहुत सारे इंस्टीट्यूट ने किया हुआ है मैकेनिज्म, जो SC ST सेल है और बाकी सब चीजें। तो यह जो स्ट्रेस और जो बच्चों के ऊपर का जो है वो कम करने के लिए मैकेनिज्म जो है वो बनाना चाहिए, ताकि यह जो इशू है स्ट्रेस का, पर्टिकुलरली एकेडमिक स्ट्रेस होता है, एंजाइटी होती है, फिर इंफेरियरिटी कॉम्प्लेक्स होता है बच्चों में, जैसे शेड्यूल कास्ट और शेड्यूल ट्राइब के जो बच्चे हैं जहां यहाँ एडमिशन लेते हैं, जब बोर्ड पे उनका शेड्यूल कास्ट शेड्यूल ट्राइब में कोटा में नाम आ जाता है, और जब हॉस्टल एलोकेशन होता है तो हॉस्टल तो प्रायोरिटी के हिसाब से सभी बच्चे मिक्स होते हैं, तो फिर ये कोटा बॉय है, इस प्रकार से कुछ डिस्कशन होता है।
नहीं, आप डिस्क्रिमिनेशन के बारे में बात कर रहे मिलिंद जी, आई टेक दैट पॉइंट, बट प्रोफेसर राजकुमार फलवारिया, the statistics are outrageous. If you've got 98 suicide cases in 5 years, and this is something that's been happening regularly, the system has obviously failed. Whatever steps have been taken have not been enough. What a lot of our viewers may not understand is that how is it that students who have worked very rigorously for these exams and are fully aware whether there's an entrance quota or not an entrance quota of pressure, because they've had to deal with pressure, why is it that they're succumbing perhaps to pressure after they enter?
Yes, Vishnu, you have raised two problems, two challenges in the higher education. One is the suicided cases and the second is the dropout case. I want to say about the suicide case. 2012 in Mungikar committee, the member of the Rajya Sabha, he said, उस कमेटी में उन्होंने कहा कि यहाँ पर सुसाइड के पीछे जो रीजंस हैं, उन रीजंस में है कि जो पर्टिकुलर जो डिप्राइव सेक्शंस के स्टूडेंट्स हैं, वो SC ST, उनका जो इवेल्युएशन होता है, उनका जो मार्किंग होता है, उस मार्किंग के कई ऐसे केसेस हैं जिनमें उनको फेल कर दिया जाता है, उनको पास करने की बजाय उनको फेल किया जाता है। Due to these reasons, there are a lot of examples, उनको लगातार कंटिन्यू पास करने के लिए, उनको फेल करने, उनको ड्रॉप करने के पीछे ये एक बहुत बड़ा रीजन है कि वो सुसाइड की ओर सोचने के लिए मजबूर हो जाते हैं। इवन 2019 किरीट P सोलंकी, member of the parliament, he is also submitted in his report, SC ST OBC वर्ग के जितने स्टूडेंट्स हैं, उन स्टूडेंट्स के साथ डिस्क्रिमिनेशन है, उनके साथ एक्सप्लॉयटेशन। दिस इज रिपोर्ट ऑफ द किरीट भाई सोलंकी रिपोर्ट सेज। तो मेरा ये कहना है कि जो हायर एजुकेशन के अंदर इस पर्टिकुलर सेक्शन के स्टूडेंट्स आते हैं, उनको जैसा वातावरण मिलना चाहिए, जैसा एटमॉस्फेयर मिलना चाहिए, जिस बैकग्राउंड से आए हैं वहां पर उनको वैसा बैकग्राउंड ना मिलने के कारण उनको सोचना पड़ता है कि वो सुसाइड की तरफ जाए। ऐसे देयर इज अ लॉ प्राइस। हम दर्शन सोलंकी की बात करें, हम हैदराबाद की प्रीति की बात करें, हम पंजाब के की बात करें, इन तीनों केसेस के अगर हम
the problem, I'll tell you, is that in this discussion we are assuming that all students are the same, that they have a common set of problems, and that's just not fair, and neither is it correct. Every student is different, they have a certain background which is different. Professor Modgalia, why is it then so many students are ending their lives or choosing to drop out? It cannot all be because of pressure. It cannot all be because of depression, right? Every student, every child, every student is different, right? Why is this happening? Is there something more, more profound that you can share with us? Or, they're depressed, they can't handle the pressure. We aren't getting at the real factors. What are they?
Yeah. I think we should, basically I continue to emphasize that the IIT entrance exams are violent. Some entrance exams to some of these institutions are violent. And suddenly, wherein we reject 99% of the people who aspire for it without worrying about them, right? We take that 1%. And suddenly you say that you become humane. I mean, I think there is some inconsistency the way we are doing. I think we subject children to a lot of violence by these entrance exams, right?
No, but they've gone through the entrance exam. Why is it that they're choosing to end their lives in 98 cases in 5 years with X number of students dropping out? We brought those statistics after actually entering the institution.
Vishnu, look at the number of people who commit suicide before they get into an institution like IIT. Do we have the statistics? I think we should compare that. I'm saying that we should be consistent. You want to be humane? Let us think of a humane way to select these children. Okay? For example, one of the things that I would want to do is, if a child, say, gets into IIT, for whatever reason, doesn't like it, okay? It's too much of a pressure on these children, not only for the target population, but almost everybody. It is just that children belonging to the target population may not have support structure at home, right? So as a result, they probably find it even more difficult. But the thing is, if we say that, look, there is somebody who wants to be a civil engineer, I'm talking about IIT, for example, wants to be a civil engineer, tries to get into IIT, doesn't get into IIT, can they still be a good civil engineer? So what will happen is, it is a more humane kind of case. So you be consistent. At the time of entrance, right now it is inhumane, it is violent. In fact, Professor Parameswaran, who was the director of TIS, said that 2/3 of the people who come to TIS are completely burnt out because they tried to get into IIT.
It's just crazy. It's just a reflection of what we become, where jobs are few, entrances are impossible to get into, and those who actually do go through that system are in a state which is unbelievable. Anand Kumar, you're going to be working very closely with us on a new series on NDTV India. Are you going to be looking very closely at some of the issues that we are talking about? Stress, depression, mental well-being, emotional wellness. Are these issues that we need to talk about when we talk about admission?
बहुत अच्छा बोला आपने. इमोशनल इशू भी बहुत होते हैं, तो हम तो समाधान की बात बोलेंगे, सॉल्यूशन की बात बोलेंगे. अभी समस्या की बात हो गई. सॉल्यूशन ये है कि भाई जो जनरल कैटेगरी के लोग हैं, उनके भी मन में भावना होनी चाहिए कि चलो ये कोटे से आए हैं, रिजर्व कैटेगरी से आए हैं, इनकी ऐसी स्थिति रही है कि इनको सहायता की जरूरत थी, हमारे साथी है. कभी भी उनको अलग थलग करके न देखे, हमेशा इस बात के लिए ख्याल रखे कि उनको कोई दुख न पहुंचे, उनको कोई तकलीफ न हो. और जो बच्चे दलित समाज से हैं, पिछड़े समाज से, उनमें भी ये भावना होना चाहिए कि अम्बेडकर साहब से लेके कई ऐसे लोग हुए जो पिछड़े समाज से होने के बाद, हाशिए पर होने के बावजूद, उनमें ये भावना थी, उनमें ये जागृति थी कि मुझे लड़ाई लड़नी है. तो जब भी उनको संघर्ष करने का मौका मिले, जब भी उनको डिप्रेशन का मौका मिले, तो डिप्रेस ना हो बल्कि स्ट्रगल करें. उनको सोचना चाहिए कि अगर हम स्ट्रगल करते, इस समस्या से निकल जाते, इसका समाधान खोजते, तो आने वाली नस्लें और आने वाली पीढ़ियों के सामने हम एक एग्जाम्पल बनेंगे, उनको प्रेरणा देंगे. इसलिए दोनों तरफ से, एक तो जो जनरल कैटेगरी के लोग हैं उनको भी साथ देना चाहिए, गले से गले मिलकर चलना चाहिए, हाथ में हाथ डाल के चलना चाहिए, और खुद को भी जो वंचित समाज से लोग हैं उनको भी अपने आप में स्ट्रांग होने की जरूरत है.
आनंद जी, जब आप स्टूडेंट्स को पढ़ाते हैं और बहुत सारे स्टूडेंट्स आते हैं आपके पास, कुछ इंटेलेक्चुअली केपेबल होते, कुछ कम केपेबल होते, बहुत प्रेशर होता है, आप इन समस्याओं को देखते हैं या आप स्टूडेंट को जब असेस करते हैं उनके मेंटल वेलबींग के बारे में भी पूछते हैं या सोचते हैं या देखते हैं, काउंसल करते हैं?
एकदम करते। दरअसल में कोई स्टूडेंट कमजोर नहीं है, कोई स्टूडेंट कम नहीं है, इतना किसको अपॉर्चुनिटी मिला ये बात है। कोई बेचारा दलित परिवार का है, पिछड़ा परिवार का है, गवर्नमेंट स्कूल में पढ़ रहा है जहां टीचर्स नहीं आ रहे हैं, रूफ अच्छे से नहीं है, कोई व्यवस्था नहीं, वहां से एक आया हुआ स्टूडेंट अब कोई 5 स्टार होटलों जैसे स्कूल से पढ़ के आया हुआ स्टूडेंट में मुकाबला है उस संस्थान तक पहुंचने का। तो इसका तो ख्याल रखना पड़ता है, उनमें मोटिवेशन डालना पड़ता है, उनकी अंतरात्मा को जगाना पड़ता है, उनमें जोश जगाना पड़ता है, उनको आने वाली समस्याओं से लड़ने के लिए सिखाना पड़ता है। और आज यही कारण है कि सुपर 30 का एक बच्चा भी ड्रॉप आउट नहीं किया और पढ़ लिख के IAS IPS से लेके अमेरिका UK हर जगह जाके अच्छा से काम कर।
पर आनंद जी ये बताइए, जब स्टूडेंट्स आपके पास आते कभी कभी और इस बारे में हमने पहले भी बात की है, और आप कई केसेस में पेरेंट्स का बहुत प्रेशर रहता है और कई केसेस में शायद स्टूडेंट एक स्ट्रीम या एक डिसिप्लिन या एक एंट्रेंस एग्जाम नहीं देना चाहते। तो इन केसेस में आप इन स्टूडेंट्स को क्या एडवाइस करते हैं, उनके पेरेंट्स को क्या एडवाइस करते हैं?
हम पेरेंट्स को तो ये एडवाइस करें कि अपने पूरे सपनों को बच्चे पर मत थोपे, उनको खिलने दे, फूलने दे। क्या होता है कि एक गांव का आदमी, देहात का आदमी हवा पर चलता है, माहौल पर चलता है। IIT UPSC अपने बच्चों को एक महंगे कोचिंग में डाल देता है, बेचारा अंतिम आखिरी कट्ठा खेत भी भेज देता है। अब बच्चे पर इतना प्रेशर हो जाता है कि जहां वो तकलीफ होती है या इंस्टीट्यूशन में जाने के बाद उसको लगता है कि मैं पढ़ाई पूरी नहीं कर पाऊंगा, वो दबाव महसूस करता है। ऐसी स्थिति में माता पिता, पेरेंट्स का भी दायित्व बनता है कि बच्चों से हमेशा बात करते, उनकी तकलीफों को समझे, उनको खराब परफॉर्मेंस पर भी उनको ये बताए। और उनमें सबसे बड़ी बात है, आज मैं इस चैनल पर बोल रहा हूं कि उन पे साहस जगाए, उनका हौसला बढ़ाए कि कोई बात नहीं, आज काली रात है, अंधेरी रात है, लेकिन सवेरा होगा, लगे रहो, भिड़े रहो। कोई आदमी पैदाइशी तेज नहीं होता है, कोई आदमी का दिमाग बहुत तेज नहीं होता है, मेहनत करके, संघर्ष करके आदमी आगे बढ़ता है। ये बात विश्वास दिलाने की जरूरत है। पेरेंट्स को भी, एजुकेशनल इंस्टीट्यूट में प्रोफेसर्स को भी, काउंसलर को भी, उनके मनोबल को बढ़ाया जाए तो कोई व्यक्ति कुछ भी कर।
You know, Anand Kumar, those are such important terms, and thank you very much for just, reminding us about that there is more to life than an exam. And people, and I think that really is the big issue. Milind Kamble, is that it? That in our country and in our thinking, and I'm sorry to generalize, if you're not a doctor or an engineer or an IAS, then that mentality is still there, then that you have not achieved. You are an underachiever. Is that the central problem over here?
ये है, ये बहुत मात्रा में यह प्रॉब्लम है पेरेंट्स के इसमें भी, कि बस पर्टिकुलरली शेड्यूल कास्ट और शेड्यूल ट्राइब में तो बस पेरेंट्स यही सोचते हैं कि वो बच्चा एक तो इंजीनियर हो जाए या डॉक्टर हो जाए, और उसका एक प्रेशर होता है। दूसरा, अभी हम प्रॉब्लम और उसके सोल्यूशन के बारे में जैसे बात कर रहे हैं, तो मैं एक IIM को हेड करता हूं, IIM जम्मू को। तो वहां पे 2019 से वो 3rd जनरेशन है, 16-17 में बना हुआ। आई एम द फर्स्ट चेयरमैन। तो वहां पे जो हमारे पास जो बच्चे आते हैं वो कैट एग्जाम के थ्रू आते हैं, ठीक है, और वो एक उनका ग्रेजुएशन पूरा हुआ होता है, तो दे आर क्वाइट मैच्योर। तो फिर भी इस प्रकार की कोई इंसिडेंस न हो, उसके लिए हमने हमारे इंस्टीट्यूट में एक सेंटर फॉर डाइवर्सिटी एंड इंक्लूजन एक हमने सेंटर बनाया है, और एक एसोसिएट प्रोफेसर उसको हेड कर रहे हैं, और जो चीजें हम बच्चों को जो समझाते हैं उसमें और भी बहुत सारा काम होता है। और दूसरा एक हमने सेंटर उसमें खोला है, आनंदम सेंटर फॉर हैप्पीनेस, और ये इसीलिए खोला है कि प्रोफेसर्स हो या स्टूडेंट हो, हमारे यहाँ तो पूरे ऑल ओवर इंडिया से स्टूडेंट है, प्रोफेसर्स है, तो उनका प्रॉपर काउंसलिंग हो, उनका वेलबींग, उनके बारे में उनका मेंटल हेल्थ, बाकी ये जो सब चीजें हैं और जो भी इश्यूज है बच्चों को आने वाले, वो फ्रीली उस जो सेंटर फॉर हैप्पीनेस जो है उसमें वो आए। जैसे विपश्यना भी होती है, योगा भी होता है, तो यह जो चीजें है यह इंस्टीट्यूट ने इस चीजों को करना चाहिए, ऐसे मुझे लगता है, ताकि जो एकेडमिक प्रेशर, देखिए अभी जो हम बात कर रहे हैं, जो हमारे लिए इंस्टीट्यूट के लिए तो बच्चे ही है, और जो भी अभी स्टैटिस्टिक्स है वो स्टैटिस्टिक्स में 50% जनरल कैटेगरी के और 50% SC, ST और OBC के बच्चे हैं। तो हमारे लिए दोनों भी बच्चे हैं एज ए इंस्टीट्यूट। तो हमको एक होलिस्टिक व्यू जो इंस्टीट्यूट चलाने वाले हैं, प्रोफेसर्स है, उनको वो रखना चाहिए और जो इश्यूज आने वाले हैं उसको एड्रेस करने का एक मैकेनिज्म।
These are great thoughts and it's wonderful to hear that you have, centers within your institute which actually look after the wellness of students, their mental health. It's just so sad that the numbers are shocking. 98 students in the last 5 years, ending their lives in the finest institutions in India. So many dropouts, so many lives affected, not just of the students, their families, their friends. Let's just hope that something is done where this entire system of entrance and the pressure that we put on our students goes away. Will it? We're going to take a short break. There's a lot more coming up, including a very special report, the details of which we are going to break now. It has been the hottest July ever in recorded history. What are the implications of this? The author of the report from the University of Leipzig joins us in the next few minutes. A new path-breaking report by the University of Leipzig, the details of which we are bringing to you right now because the report has been released as we speak, says that this month, July, is the hottest month ever recorded in the world. Perhaps the hottest month in 120,000 years, with an average temperature about 1.5 degrees hotter than the planet was before it was warmed by burning coal, by gas, by oil, by all sorts of other human activity. Here's what the data shows us. It shows us, broadly speaking, that temperatures will continue to increase and extreme weather conditions will become worse unless there's a drastic drop in the use of fossil fuel until we reach net zero emissions. This month, July's average global temperature is between 1.2 and 1.7 degrees centigrade above average July temperatures before humans began warming the planet by burning fossil fuels. There have been several erratic weather patterns around the world in July. We'll come to that in a moment. But increased rainfall intensity, the frequency of heat waves, they're all directly linked to rising sea and surface temperatures. That is a huge problem which is all a part of this. Now again, in terms of specific examples, our own monsoon in India has been violent, it's been erratic. Those words have been used in that report. There's a growing risk of flooding. We've seen the impact of this in just the last few weeks. Actions to cut emissions, and this is the big challenge, are still inadequate. The world may be destined to fail the 1.5 degree limit set in the Paris Agreement. If we don't reduce global warming to within 1.5 degrees, then we are in deep, deep trouble. Now, the report is important because we see climate change all around us. The examples just this month alone are shocking. And the University of Leipzig has actually come out with several details. We'll just give you a few examples. In July, there have been 23 consecutive days of global temperatures above the previous record. The hottest ever ocean waters have been recorded in one location, ocean waters off the coast of Florida in the United States. The hottest night ever recorded globally has been registered at Death Valley in the United States at 48.9 degrees centigrade, the hottest night temperature that. At 52.2 degrees centigrade, China recorded its hottest days, also the hottest recorded temperature above 43 degrees north latitude. There's been a record low Antarctic sea ice recorded this month. That's seen to be a 1 in 13 billion year event. So those are just a couple of examples. Let's take a look at a couple of reactions before we bring in the author of this report.
The era of global warming has ended, the era of global boiling has arrived. The air is unbreathable, the heat is unbearable, and the level of fossil fuel profits and climate inaction is unacceptable.
If we don't stick to 1.5 degrees, what can happen?
It's a great question, and the answer is incredibly complex. Climate and weather impact on almost everything around our globe. And you've listed a few of the things just already, things like heat waves and Arctic sea ice. The list of things goes on. If you just take one example, which is increased heat extremes, that obviously affects people's health. It affects people's mental health. It affects agriculture, livestock and crops. It affects our water resources because evaporation goes up. It affects labour productivity. So higher temperatures result in lower labour productivity. It impacts on our biodiversity. So it impacts on the natural environment in big ways through things like fires and heat extremes. And so when we start to look at the evidence for climate change impacts, it's everywhere around us already. That's what the last IPCC report showed, Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change report showed. We don't have to wait for decades for climate change to be here with us. It's here right now.
Professor Haustein, tell us about this July and the data that you've picked up now. It is the hottest July, but what strikes me is that the impact is visible in data points that you have collected from around the world. Could you share some details of that?
Yeah, that's true. It's kind of not surprising that we see these kind of records. The number is 0.2 of degrees centigrade above the old record, which was only 4 years ago. And that is quite the margin, which is why we also are so confident that this July is going to be the hottest for sure, which was so easy to already announce these results. And the WMO, the World Meteorological Organization, did that today as well. And it's still kind of scary, isn't it? Because it's also scratching now the 1.5 degree threshold more and more often. This is the first time it does so in a summer month. It's also the warmest month ever since we have records. Probably have to go back many thousands, if not 10,000 years to see something similar. And as we've just heard, we have to realize that the effects of climate change are already affecting us now. And it's most visible really this year, this summer. And it's, just crazy for someone who has been studying that for years.
You've used the words violent and erratic. I think those were the words to describe the Indian monsoon. Dr. Haustein, could you tell us about your concerns specific to the monsoon? It affects billions across South Asia.
Yeah, the monsoon as a system is not going to break. So that's not a tipping point in the climate system. But what we do know is that the pre-monsoon, that is really important for agricultural, for crops and for the respective harvest, that is affected. Mm-hmm. So that might just fall dry, and then we end up with like a season where all these crop failures are visible. And when it comes to the actual monsoon, which is going to be more intense as far as rainfall is concerned in the future, just because there's more moisture in the atmosphere, that might lead to even more of these very detrimental and damaging flood events.
Aditya Pillai, the problem that we see in India is erratic weather patterns. When it rains much harder, and yet there are parts of our country, even now in a year when we are already in excess of the predictions for rainfall, which are seeing below average rainfall. And so in terms of a pattern, it's mixed up, right? That's one of the impacts of this climate emergency?
Absolutely. I mean, that's one of the major ones. And India is particularly vulnerable to that sort of thing because of the percentage of our working population that's in agriculture. And we have no way of predicting which area is going to be flooded and which area is going to be drought prone. And there's no way to build public policy systems to address that. So what does one do if, for example, over 2 years, a particular village in Haryana is flooded and then has drought-like conditions and you have 2 consecutive crop failures? So this is the sort of thing that makes it really, really vexing. And the intensity of these things is going up, right? The intensity of flooding is getting worse and the intensity of the heat during the drought is getting worse.
Professor Haustein, one of the really frightening details which did emerge was of Antarctic ice. And the findings in the month of July, it's what a once every X billion years that you see a phenomena like that. Why is the melting of Antarctic ice something which can affect ecosystems around the world? I think you're on mute.
Antarctica is a bit of a...
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, sorry, my bad. Antarctica is a bit of a special continent in that the circulation is different to most of the rest of the world, and it can be, like the cold in winter can be locked up there, or it can be released, and on the other hand, like warm air can intrude into the continent, which it did this year. And depending on the circulation, the sea ice can change a lot. The anomalies of the sea ice can change a lot. And what we are expecting that the extremes like this year become more extreme, and what the effects are for the global climate change is first and foremost, it's the sea ice melt. It's that these Antarctic ice sheets become unstable, and this is like the most efficient contributor really to sea level rise. In terms of like the global circulation, I think we have to look at El Nino, La Nina, the central tropical Pacific, and it's obviously a contributor already to the heat that we are seeing across the globe, but the effects are only going to be seen in the remainder of the year and early 2024, and that should certainly give more reason for concern.
Professor Houghton, let's talk a little bit more about various atmospheric conditions and weather patterns actually contributing to a rise in seawater temperatures, Antarctic ice melting faster, Arctic ice melting faster, temperatures increasing as well. Would that possibly mean that low-lying areas where there are coral formations, island formations, or peninsular regions would be some of the worst hit, which means a direct impact on millions of people living in these areas?
Yeah, absolutely, and that is the concern. This is nothing new. We have all these simulations. We kind of know what sea level rise is going to look like. All we didn't know so far is how quick it can actually happen. And with an extreme year like that, like this year in Antarctica, it's certainly another harbinger for what is to come. And for like low-lying areas like India, especially Bangladesh, where we have huge vulnerable populations, they will be affected first. And this is, you know, what some of these like Western, more developed countries forget, that this is really something they have caused, because the cumulated emissions, they matter. And the cumulated emissions, they are caused by those countries, and they have to take the responsibility there. And obviously for decades they have been doing that. And this is what we as climate scientists keep saying, and we are ringing the alarm bell, I guess, for decades, and yet there is no will really to tackle the issue. And I can only hope that as much as, you know, these like temperature records, these floods that we are seeing, that they then lead to action before, you know, we see more catastrophic events unfolding.
Professor Mark Houghton, would you like to take that point and that question of low-lying areas being impacted, our coral treasures around the world being impacted, marine diversity being impacted as a result of rising seawaters and warmer seas?
Indeed, and just to pick up the thread from the previous speaker, looking first at sea level rise, what we're seeing is multiplicative, you know, multiple things which are looking worse and worse over time. So, for example, the sea level is actually going up faster and faster over time, so it's accelerating. We're seeing the estimated number of people affected by sea level rise, a given level of sea level rise, is much higher now because we've got better ways of estimating how many people are going to be affected. So different measurement techniques. And we're also seeing interaction between different factors, different climate-driven factors. So when you have sea level rise and you have a big cyclone or typhoon, you get a lot more flooding, you get bigger storm surges. So it's the combination of sea level rise and the stronger typhoons that we're seeing as a proportion of the total cyclones or typhoons. So you're getting multiple things happening at once in terms of that sea level rise and the damage. And then if you're living by the coast, as you just said, we're seeing the ecosystems, the coral systems, the seagrass systems and others being affected by high temperatures. So for a long time now, we've actually seen coral deaths. That's coral bleaching when you get very high temperatures in the ocean. But we're also seeing ocean acidification, because as the ocean absorbs carbon dioxide, the pH drops so that it gets slightly more acidic. And those things interact with each other. And then you have more wave energy and those big cyclones, and you have a whole series of things which are impacting negatively. And so we need to be very concerned about the impacts of climate change and how those impacts interact with each other. Sea level rise, increased cyclones, increased temperature, reduced oxygen, reduced alkalinity in our oceans, because all of those things add up. They're not separate, they interact.
Aditya, how would you respond to people who say that we're still a long way away from reaching that 1.5 degree mark, and some would suggest that until you hit 2 degrees, it's not going to be profoundly life altering? This is what pessimists of perhaps this program would suggest. How would you respond to them?
I'd say it's a big warning. The fact that the WMO just a few months ago, in fact, we discussed this on the show, they came out and said that at least one of the next 5 years has a 66% chance of reaching 1.5. The Paris Agreement and every country on earth got together and said 1.5 is the threshold we promise not to cross, we would like not to cross, and 2 definitely is something we don't want to cross. So this is enshrined in ways that obviously give it importance, it gives it weight. And we're seeing right now, right today, as you list out this litany of instances and damages that are causing people serious economic discomfort. People are losing lives every day, right? So there's not a lot of time left for us to react to this. I'm glad you spoke about mitigation right off the bat, because now the pressure's on COP28, COP29, COP30, because this is where we need to come to some sort of consensus on aggressive global decarbonization with equity baked in for developing countries. But I also want to say one thing. I mean, for viewers listening to all of these impacts, all is not lost. Right, and I think there's sometimes a feeling that things might be hopeless, and these are reasons to despair. This is a bit like the first session on the second day of a test match, right? There's a long way to go yet. There's a lot to play for. There's a lot on the table, and if we do 3 or 4 big things right, we can actually stave off a lot of this and keep things within manageable range, right? But those 3 or 4 big things are a bit like renovating your house, right? It's a lot of discomfort. You really have to sort of step out of your house for a couple of months, right? It goes on, and it's a lot of money, that's the discomfort you have to bear. But once you move back in, hopefully life is better, and you could create a better world out of this, right? Stronger local government capacity, for example, a welfare state, social safety nets. These are things that are good to have.
Dr. Haustein, we are seeing huge transformations around the world when it comes to the adoption of electric vehicles. We've seen a lot of technological change as far as batteries are concerned. We are seeing a record adoption of solar energy. Certainly in my country, India, there's, we are well on our path to water. Is that enough to make a difference?
I mean, it's definitely more than that. And this is what gives me hope. And I think I'm not the only one here. And we just heard how all these changes, all these investments eventually lead to a better world. So even if it wasn't for climate change, that's what people have been saying for years. We should be doing those things. And so I'm thrilled to see that we now eventually see like the electric mobility, like ramping up the way, we were hoping. The same is true with renewables in China and India, even parts of Europe, and I might say even the wildest part of the US, Texas, Kansas, like the flyover states. You see wind parks of epic proportions. And so people know that this is the way to go. And obviously now it's financially feasible. And it's going to be like a no-brainer for everyone. So I think we are on the right track. And perhaps there's a bit of a surprise package there. that we pick up speed quicker than anticipated. Yet there are a couple of segments that are difficult to decarbonize, and obviously that's where we need to continue to have conversations. And I might also add to the previous point that 1.5 is certainly an agreed on threshold, but it's not baked in stone that we are all going to die after that. It's certainly not going to happen. It's a slow process. Even 2 degrees is something which is going to be really, really tricky and really dangerous, but still we are not going to die. Every 1/10 of a degree matters. And this is what we have to fight for, whether it's 1.6, 1.7, 1.8. And I think we have gotten a memo on a global scale, just we all have to fight for more efforts.
Professor Mark Howden, is it your sense that in the meanwhile, temperatures will keep rising?
Yeah, the science is very clear, is that while we continue to have our foot on the climate change accelerator, greenhouse gas emissions, the temperature will go up on average, and we'll see more and more of the temperature extremes and similar things that we've talked about so far. And that science is very robust, and it's been around for a long, long time. The challenge for us is that even though we have the Paris Agreement and we have electric vehicles and solar panels and all those sorts of things, our global greenhouse gas emissions continue to rise. Last year was the record emissions. It broke the previous year. The year before that, which was COVID, was a little dip, but the year before that was a record, etc. So we haven't taken our foot off the climate change accelerator, and we need to do that very, very soon if we're to stick to 1.5 or even 1.6 or 1.7. So the IPCC is very clear on that. We need to have very rapid, very large, and very sustained greenhouse gas emission reductions. That's carbon dioxide and the other greenhouse gases. And just to pick up one of the threads that was talked about before, which includes the costs of climate change and the costs of adapting to climate change and the costs of impacts of climate change. Again, the IPCC's analysis is pretty clear, and that is taking action on climate change, reducing our emissions and adapting to climate change is far, far more economically beneficial than not doing anything. The worst thing we can do economically is actually just let it rip. And so that's a really clear message for policymakers. It's a really clear message, I think, for people around the globe, is that's the thing we can't afford to do.
Look, I'd like to thank you all very much for joining us and speaking to us at length about all of these issues. The world needs to wake up. We certainly, as journalists, need to keep sharing this message. I'd like to thank you all very much for being with us. We're out of time. On Left, Right and Centre, from all of us here, good night.